Good morning, everyone, and happy Monday. Hope you all had a great weekend. I had a super relaxing weekend. I worked a little bit, but tried to relax as much as possible. I hope you're all well. We have Eric, Ahmad, Dilip, Snipe UI, who I recognize from Twitter. We just chatted a little bit. Chris Cannon. A lot of awesome people in the chat this morning. Hope you're having a great Monday. We have a few more days till Friday. I can't wait already. But we have a pretty fun show for you today. We're going to be diving into Adobe XD, specifically for people who may not have really started to use it or may not understand the whole concept of Adobe XD. We're going to diving into auto-animate, which is an amazing feature, which we actually just released a dribble contest, which I'll show you in a second. We're going to be doing some time transitions, whole lot of stuff. And if I hop over to my screen for a second, actually before I do that, we also it's going to be fun. There's going to be a lot of stuff they're going to be covering. And if you really want to learn UI and UX and see how professionals tackle some projects, definitely tune in for that. So what are we going to be tackling today? And hey, Ahmad, I hope you're doing well. So let me hop over to my screen here. And this is my dribble profile, which, by the way, if you're not following me, shameless plug, do that. But I've had a lot of people ask questions about this that I posted a little bit ago. This parallax website effect with these clouds in the foreground, little image gallery it slides up from the bottom. And people kind of wanted to know, oh, we have some technical difficulties. Uh-oh, are we not live? Can you hear me? Are you able to hear my voice? Hang on. We might have some technical difficulties. Everything sounds fine. Yep, okay. Maybe we don't have technical difficulties. I'm back. Okay, sorry about that. Looks like we had some dropped frames on my end. Okay, I'm gonna continue. So, when I uploaded this, and I actually demoed this at Adobe Max as well, we had some people ask how this is created in Adobe XD and how some of these animates, because if you're noticing the clouds actually pull out faster than the mountain and the background. So we're going to be kind of going over some of that stuff today. We're going to be creating a landing page like this, plus a few other things that I'm going to slide in there. So, and I also uploaded to Dribble a few other things that you can kind of dive into, and some of them have attachments as well. Now, speaking of Dribble, we did just announce today a new contest. If you go to dribble.com, Dribble with 3 B's, we have a contest for auto-animate. There's a little brief here. You can also download the auto-animate UI kit that we released last week. You can watch a tutorial. And this is a fun, I created this animation a few weeks ago. This was really fun to make. Let's play it back one more time. And it just kind of shows you all the fun little, not all of them, but just a few little things you can create using auto-animate pretty simply in Adobe XD. And some of this we might actually touch on today in the stream. And then you can download the UI kit directly from Dribble, or if you go to Behance, you can also download it there as well. So, without further ado, as long as my audio works and as long as all of you are relaxed and ready to go, we're going to hop into Adobe XD and we're going to start designing. We're actually going to touch on Photoshop a little bit as well. So, I'm going to create a web page, because this is going to be a landing page. Let's go for 1920 by 1080 to start off with. And as I'm going through this process, if you have any questions about Adobe XD or anything really, sort of anything, just let me know in the comments. I will be trying to answer as many questions as I can. So to start off this landing page, we're just going to block out some stuff. We're going to start with an image in the background. I'm going to grab my rectangle tool over to the left. Here's all your tools over here. And I'm simply going to drag out a rectangle. And this is going to house my image. And I'm going to change the color just so I can see it against the background. And a lot of people ask, why don't you just drag the image into Adobe XD? Why do you drag it into a rectangle? And the short answer is because if I'm working with very large images, like this image here that we're going to be using, it's a pretty large image. If I just drag it into Adobe XD, well, this one's probably not very large, but if it was large, it would basically like fill up the entire document. And I have to find it, zoom out, resize it. I don't want to deal with that. So what I'm able to do is just grab this image, drag it on top of the rectangle. It highlights in blue and it automatically masks it. So I'm going to leave that image right there for now. We will adjust the masking later, but if I double click on it, I can easily just grab the image, make changes, and when I click off of it, it masks it again. Cool stuff. Now at the top, we're going to add a little bit of a navigation bar. And before I do that, I actually want to hop into my layers, make sure everything is named properly. Because this will be very important when you do get to the auto-animate phase. You want to make sure your layers are named and the types of layers are correct as well. And I'll touch on that in a little bit. So I'm going to grab my rectangle, drag out a box across the top, just like this. And this is going to be for the navigation bar. I don't need a border. Let's set the fill to black and then decrease the opacity just a little bit so we can see some of the background. There we go. That looks pretty good. And now over to the right, we want to have some links and maybe some social media icons. So I'm going to type out, let's say home. I can't see that. Let's make it white. There we go. And what font should work well? Let me know in the comments when you're reading this, what fonts you typically gravitate towards when you're designing things. Avenir Next is one of my favorite. Medium or bold? Maybe bold can be for home, and then medium can be for the rest. So I'll do home. Now you could use a repeat grid in this example, but for navigation links, I typically duplicate them separately. And this could be discover. And this one could be book. And let's say ideas. Lato. Lato's a good one. All right, now at this point, obviously these things are not spaced out perfectly. I could move them, and then you're noticing as I move book, it kind of snaps into place and tells me that book is now the same distance that discover is from home. But there's another way we can do it. We can basically put, let's say, home and ideas, right? And I want to say that discover and book will kind of line up equally between these. So I'm going to select all these layers, all these text layers, holding it on my shift key. And then over here to the right, this icon right here, let me zoom in, distribute horizontally. And it'll basically take all these layers and distribute them horizontally based on the first and the last one. I'm going to group this, Command or Control G, put this into a group. Let's name this nav links. Whoops. Nav links. And I'm going to center this on my document. Perfect. Now it's a little too small. Let me make these a little bit bigger and center it one more time. Great. So now we have a navigation bar. Simple, but we have a navigation bar. Now over here to the right, we may want to add some social media icons. So I'm going to hop over to icon jar and let's add, let's say Twitter. Oh, I don't have any social. Oh, wait, all. Let's see. I don't have any. Well, there you go. So I'm going to copy them. I have another document over here. I'm just going to grab these social media icons and bring them over. If I can find them. There we go. Now we have icons. It's as easy as that. Place those over there. This will be nav background. And I'll make sure to put all of this into a group called navigation bar. I usually slack with my layer namings, but today I'm going to make sure everything's named properly. And I'm also going to grab this logo that I have and just pop it over here. Perfect. Now, one thing I should note that is if you do have like a sticker sheet or a style guide that contains logos and social media icons and things like that, you can now use linked symbols, which will basically keep everything up to date across your entire documents, which is really nice. So I'm going to put this into the navigation bar. So at this point, we have a pretty simple layout. We have an image in the background. We have a navigation bar, we have a logo, some social media icons over here, and some text layers, which I'm actually going to grab home. Let's make this one bold. And then maybe these three, I'm going to decrease the opacity just a little bit so we know exactly which page that we are sitting on. There we go. Dagny asks, hi there, can you explain why text boxes sometimes do not show white circles at 4 corners versus one at the bottom? It's most likely because this one here, this one has a little white circle which you can drag up and down. And that's because if I hover over here, this is a point text. But if it was area text, which is basically like a paragraph box, you'll get the ones in the corner. So that's probably what you're seeing, I would assume. Alrighty. So at this point, we want to really make this parallax effect look something interesting, and we can't do this with a static image. So this one here, it's not going to move if we start to auto-animate. So we actually need 2 separate images, and that's kind of where Photoshop comes into play with something like this. So I'm going to go over to, I have this image here, and basically want to quickly cut out this mountain from the background. So let me hop into Photoshop for a second. And I know you probably weren't expecting a Photoshop tutorial, but I'm going to make this somewhat quick. I'm going to grab my quick selection tool from the tools bar on the left, make it a little bit larger, and then simply just brush over top of these mountains to make a selection. Make sure to get as much of them as possible. It doesn't have to be perfect because it will be sitting on basically the same background. So if there's a little bit of imperfection, you won't really see it. Now with that done, I'm going to select and mask at the top, and you're seeing that the selection, again, not perfect, but not terrible. Increase the radius a little bit, turn on smart radius so it gets some of those trees and some of the grass. And if there are areas that were not selected, I can very easily grab my brush refinement tool, refine edge brush, and just brush in some of those extra little trees. Happy little trees, as Bob Ross would say. I miss Bob Ross. Okay, that looks pretty good. And I'm going to output it as, let's say, a layer mask. And press OK. So now basically I have this mountain separated from the background. Again, not perfect, but because we exported it as, outputted it as a layer mask, I can grab my brush tool, switch over to either a white or black brush, black to add, white to hide. Sorry, white to hide, black to add, and just fix up these little areas here. Bob Ross was awesome. And I can hold down my shift key, and I can click on the layer mask to see the before and after, just to make sure I have everything under control. Again, I don't want to spend too much time in Photoshop, but that's kind of where both these applications can work hand in hand for things like this. There we go. Remember to take notes. Yes. Gus Spot is in the house. What could he be hinting at? What could I be hinting at? You never know. So, now that that's done, I've basically cut out the background from the mountains, or the mountains from the background, whichever way you want to put it. And because Creative Cloud Library syncs between all of our different applications, all I can do is just grab this layer and drag it into my Creative Cloud Libraries. I already have this actually in here. And if I double click on this, I'll have it opened up. And here's basically the mountain layer. And there's also a hue and saturation adjustment on top of this one. But that's basically all you have to do. Make your edits, drag it into your Creative Cloud Libraries, and it will sync. Now for the sake of time, because it was a large image and it might take a little bit to sync, I pre-did this one. So let's hop back over to Adobe XD. And if I go up to the File menu, down to Open Creative Cloud Libraries, we have our libraries here. And I can just grab this mountain layer, drag it onto my document, and move it into place. Just like that. Now for this first screen, I basically want the mountains to be a lot larger, kind of in our face. And then on the second screen, they'll kind of shrink down. But before I do that, I'm gonna move this into place. Let me close my Creative Cloud Libraries. And move this, let's say, right about here. And you're noticing the mountains definitely are bigger And you can just make this bigger or smaller if you wanted to. And I'll put them right about there. Make sure it lines up with the one in the background and place it right about there. Great. So now that that's done, there's a few more elements we want to put into place before we actually do anything. The clouds, definitely one of them, but before we get to that, we want to add an icon at the bottom that's going to pop up with the mountain layer as it kind of descends into the background. So I'm going to make a little, basically this one's going to be for an images icon. So I'm going to grab my ellipse tool, make a little circle right there. Let's turn off the fill and set the border to white. Set the size to, let's say, 5. How does that look? That's not too bad. Let's go for 6. All right. And now inside this, we're going to grab a few rectangles. I'm going to zoom right in here. Make the corners just a little bit round. Not too much. Turn off the border. And I'll basically have 3 of them going across. Make sure they all line up together. And 3 down. And this is basically going to be the icon where people can click on to see images of various places around the world. And I do want to make sure that they're all grouped into a group. This will be images icon. There we go. Fantastic. Now in this artboard, we basically want this images icon to be hidden below the artboard, and then on the second one, it'll kind of rise up from the bottom. So now you're going to notice that if I just grab this guy and move it below the artboard, it's actually going to drop onto the pasteboard, which we don't want. So what we have to make sure to do is add it to a group with other objects that are on this artboard, right? So we'll actually grab it, we'll do it with the hills icon, and we'll just group that, and we'll name this moving elements. So now, if I grab the images icon group, drag it down off the artboard, it doesn't actually go onto the pasteboard because it's grouped with an object that is already on the artboard. So that's good. And we're also going to turn the opacity down to 0. Now, we get to the clouds. How do the clouds work? Now basically, back in my Creative Cloud libraries, I did the exact same thing I did before with the mountains. I grabbed some images of clouds, I dragged them to my Creative Cloud libraries, made some edits if I needed to, and they synced. And what I'm able to do is simply drag these onto my document from Creative Cloud and just position them anywhere I want. So I can position this one here. I'll make sure the logo in the background is seen just a little bit. And I'll grab this one. Oh, wrong way. Let's put this one over here. And this one over here. There we go. Make sure that logo is seen. Let me close my Creative Cloud libraries. And hey, everyone who is just joining us, welcome. And I'll position this one here. All right. There we go. And these ones are already named because they were already named in my Creative Cloud libraries. It does maintain that name, and they are still linked. So at any point I wanted to make changes, I should probably point on that. So if I go to my hills layer, for example, let me hide my clouds. Let's say I'm looking at this hills layer and I decide either I want the saturation adjustment that I had in Photoshop a little bit too, maybe it's a bit too much, or maybe I want it a little bit more saturated. What I can do is go back to my Creative Cloud libraries. Because it's linked, I can right click, press edit. Photoshop is going to automatically launch with that exact same file, and I can turn off the saturation adjustment, or I can turn it back on. I can edit it in the properties. Say I want to make it, probably don't want that, but I can turn this off, save it, and then if I go back to my Creative Cloud libraries inside of Adobe XD, you're noticing it's now syncing. And again, because it's a pretty large file, it might take a little bit to sync, so we'll just let that do its thing. It'll do it in the background, and when it has updated, it'll update on the document, which is great. So, let me put the clouds back on. Boop, boop. Now, how do we actually animate this thing? So, we're gonna grab this layer. I'm actually gonna, this artboard. Parallax, let's say this is before. Oh, you know what I forgot? I forgot some text. That's kind of important. So let's do that. Let's open up this artboard again. Let me hide these clouds. we'll actually hide the hills layer, and we're going to add some text in the background. So let's see. The world is waiting. I'll just do the same as I did on my dribble example. Make sure this is behind the hills layer and make this nice and large. Let's see what font we're going to go with. Din Condense is pretty nice. Spaced out a little bit too much, and I may want is waiting a little bit larger so it lines up with the world at the top, and make this just a little bit bigger. Make sure to center it in my document. And basically the idea for this is on the next artboard, it's going to also rise, kind of as the mountains go down, the text is going to rise and reveal itself. It's also going to get a little bit bigger. So we want this to start somewhat small, somewhat, let's say right around there. Not too drastic, but drastic enough. And let's bring back everything. Okay, so now that that's done, we can duplicate this artboard. So I'm going to select the artboard and Command or Control D to duplicate it. You can also hold down Alt or Option and drag it over. I'm going to rename this artboard, and it's okay if your artboards have different names. As long as the layers within it have the same names, you're good. And I'm actually going to space this out so we can really... Oh, hey Aaron, welcome. And you're wondering how this was done in the Animate. Yeah, I wanted to include this exact example, but I didn't have the rights to these images, so I couldn't actually distribute them. But the ones in that UI kit I took myself a few years ago, so I can distribute those. So once that's done, we're going to start moving things around. Now, I'm just noticing an issue. If I grab this top clouds layer and move it over here, it's actually going to drag, move that one there, and then move this one here. They're going to drag onto the pasteboard eventually. There it goes. So what we have to make sure to do is put these into, I'm going to put them into the moving elements group. And I also want to make sure that that's updated on this artboard as well. Otherwise, we're going to run into issues. Great. Now that we're good to go, we're going to grab our clouds and we're going to move this here and we're going to move this here. Now this is going to be the final animation because I'll get to, I'm trying to show you what you would typically do and then what you can do later, right? Now we're going to grab the hills layer. We're going to make it a little bit smaller and set it down into place so it's kind of lines up with the mountains in the background. We're going to grab our text, moving on up, make it nice and large. Oops. And then the background, we're actually going to, let me hide all these moving elements. We're going to double click on the background, make it a little bit smaller, not too much. And I actually might want to go back to this one here and make the background just a touch bigger. There we go. Okay, so now that both artboards are set up, and that's the really cool thing about auto-animate in Adobe XD, all you really need to do is design state 1, design state 2, link everything up, and things just work. It's just magic like that. So how do we actually make this animated? And one more thing I forgot to do is grab my images icon, which is hiding down here. Completely forgot about this little guy. Increase the opacity to 100% and just move it up into place. Beautiful. So now we're good to go. I'm going to hop into prototype mode right here at the top, and I'm going to select the entire artboard because this is going to be used, it's going to be a time transition. Because at this point, there's really nothing to click on. You could have a tap transition and just tap on anything to start this thing, but I'll do a time transition, which is only available when you have an entire artboard selected. I'm going to drag this handle over to the right, make sure that time is selected for the trigger. I'm going to have a little bit of a delay so it doesn't start immediately. Let's say 0.6 seconds. The action is going to be auto-animate because we want those fancy animations. The easing is going to be in and out, so there's a little bit of a curve at the beginning and the end, so it's not just like right away in your face. And my dog's barking back there. And the duration, let's say it's 4 seconds. We want it nice and slow. Now, once we press play, watch what happens. Oops. It's on the wrong screen. It's over here. Ignore that. Okay, now, when you press play, watch what happens. fancy. But you're probably noticing that the clouds kind of moved at the same speed as the mountains in the background, which it looks fine, but we want it a little bit more drastic than that. So what we can do is go back into design mode and just grab these clouds and just move them. Like just pop them up here, right? Grab this one, pop it all the way down here. And you kind of want it to make sure it's aligned in this like diagonal line from the middle. And now when we play it, the clouds are going to move at a much faster rate. And then the mountains come down, text comes up. Cool stuff. I love this. And look how simple it was to design and animate in Adobe XD. You just kind of make these little elements on both screens, and it just does the rest for you. Let's see that one more time. Clouds move nice and quick. Mountains move slowly. And you're also probably noticing in the background image, because we adjusted the mask, it's also moving, but very slightly. Because if you were to somehow recreate this in the real world, which would be very difficult, the background would move slower. You know, if you're driving in a car and you're driving by posts, the posts are moving very quickly, but the background's moving very slowly. So it's kind of the same idea, I guess. So that's that. So now there's a few other elements that we might want to add. Basically, when someone clicks on this images icon, some images pop up from the bottom. So we're going to grab the parallax after artboard. I can probably move it back over here now. And we're going to drag this. Let's move it over here. Vlad Air could watch this all day long. I probably did watch it all day long. I actually got sick of it when I was trying to perfect it for Dribble. I got sick of this thing. But yeah, it's smooth enough that you could probably watch it all day long. So in this one, we want to make this little image gallery at the bottom. So what we're going to do, we're going to add a few rectangles down here. Let's say 1, 2, 3, probably 4. Perfect. Look how well that lined up. Make sure these are centered. Great. I'm going to group them all, and this will be images. And I'm also going to put this into the moving elements section because it will be moving at some point. Turn off the border for all of these, and if you do have multiple layers selected with a border or a fill and you have a group selected, you can also adjust them all at once. That perfectly lined up, right? I didn't plan that. Now I have back in Finder, I have a few images that we're going to be just dragging in here. Now the reason I'm not using a repeat grid in this example is because the images will actually animate at some point. We're going to make some larger, some smaller, at least the boxes. So at that point, I would have to break the repeat grid anyway. So I'll drag this image in here, and I'll drag, let's say, this one in here. Great. So now we have a bunch of images. There we go. Now I want to make sure that these images are also present on this artboard here. Otherwise, when we go to animate this thing, basically when we're clicking on this images icon, those images will pop up from the bottom. So I want to make sure that they're on that artboard as well. So I'm going to grab this whole group, copy it, paste on this artboard, make sure it's in the same moving elements group, and position it right below. Now this images icon, obviously we don't want it to stay there. So we're going to grab the images icon on this artboard, and let's say we're going to move it up. And we're going to have fun with this one. Let's make this, we're going to basically, instead of these images, we're going to change this icon so that it looks like a little down arrow. So what we're going to do, we're going to select these. Just going to drag these out just to make it like a nice little line. Just like that. Do the same thing for these ones down here. All right. Now I'm going to select, okay, it's every second one. That makes sense. No, it doesn't. See, this is why it's so important to organize your groups and your layers. Let's make this, let's say, 7. That looks pretty good. And we'll select the ones that make up the top. Make this a height of 7. Maybe a width of 35. 1, 2, 3, and 35. That might work. Now we'll rotate these. And I'm holding down my shift key as I'm rotating to snap it into place. And I believe it rotates 15 degrees each time you do that. There we go. Move this down. And I can probably make this a little bit smaller. There we go. So now the images icon has been changed, but all the layer names are exactly the same as they were before. So what's cool is that, so Alex is saying, what I particularly don't like about this feature is that users don't have full behavior control. I don't want to give away too much, but the team is looking into more control. But we basically wanted to start off with something that would be very easy for UI and UX designers to just jump into, design state 1, state 2, state 3, whatever it might be, and then auto-animate will kind of do the rest. But we've definitely heard from designers like yourself that more behavior control is necessary in some cases. So there might be stuff in the works, maybe, who knows. Make this a little bit smaller, and I may actually want to rotate this one more. Yeah, there we go. And one more. Make sure these are all in place. Perfect. And maybe, you know what? I'm going to move it over here because I can. So now again, because all the layer names were identical across this artboard and this artboard, our goal is to have this icon kind of shift and morph into from this to this. And also the images will kind of slide up from the bottom. So back in prototype mode, at this point, we basically want to say when someone taps on the images icon, I'm going to drag this over here. It's going to transition to this artboard. So it's going to be a tap. And you're noticing time is not available because I don't have the entire artboard selected. So I'm going to select tap, make sure auto-animate is chosen. We can do maybe in and out. We'll see. We'll try it. We'll try a few different things. 4 seconds would be way too long. So let's go for 0.4 seconds. And let's see how this looks. So starting from the beginning, we have the cool little parallax effect, right? And then we click on this button at the bottom and the images come up. And you probably didn't see that morph. So let me go ahead and actually, let's go back to 4 seconds, just so you can see what's happening when that icon is clicked. Watch closely. The elements are actually moving and shifting and transforming to, it's not just like, it's not a snap and then it converts into this down arrow. It actually takes those elements and morphs them into a down arrow. It's kind of cool. Now, obviously 4 seconds is way too long. No one wants to be waiting that long. So I think 0.4 second looks pretty good. Yeah, you can't even notice at that point, but it does its thing, which is great. So now at this point, we basically want, when someone clicks on an image, the image is going to pop up and get a little bit larger. So we're going to duplicate this artboard. And let's say, which image do we want larger? This image, maybe? This image? Let's go with this image. So we're going to move this up. Make sure things line up. And just make it larger. And you're noticing the masking, it's not distorting the image. Everything, all the masking is the way it is. And we'll just make sure to hide that little images icon. Perfect. Now what do we do with these guys down here? Well, what we could do, center this, we can just move them. Just like that. And now back in prototype mode, we can select this image here, move this over. It's gonna be tap. Let's actually do a snap for this one and then 0.4 seconds. Let's see how that looks. Whoop. So that image gets bigger. The ones at the bottom kind of shift into place. Everything's nice and silky smooth. And now we might want some text. So we don't want necessarily the text to appear immediately after clicking on the image. We may want it to appear a few seconds later, or maybe half a second later. So I'm going to duplicate this artboard one more time. And let's add some text. I'm not sure who took this photo, but just for argument's sake, actually it might be in the actual image. Aha! I'm gonna make sure to give credit to this guy, Ian Valerio. So I'm gonna add some text. His name is Ian Valerio. There we go. Make it a little bit smaller. And this might be Japan. I'm gonna just say it's Tokyo, Japan for now. I could be wrong, but I might be right. I don't know. Tokyo, Japan. This probably doesn't have to be condensed. We'll make it nice and small and decrease the opacity a little bit. Now for here, I may actually want to grab my icons and let's location, add a little location icon. Come on, there we go. Make this white. What was the opacity of this one? This was 42%. Oops. There we go. Make it a little bit smaller. Okay, that looks okay. Great, so I'm gonna make sure all of these are grouped up. We have the location, Tokyo, Japan, and Ian's name. We're gonna group this and name this meta. Let's put it right about here. Now we want to make sure, because we're transitioning from this artboard to this one, we want to make sure that all this text stuff is also available on this artboard. So I'm going to copy it, head over here, make sure to paste it, make sure it's in the images group. We're going to move it up, and we're going to turn the opacity down to 0. Now with that done, back in prototype mode, we want a time transition from this artboard to this one immediately after this to this. So we're going to select this entire artboard, grab the handle to the right, make sure that time is selected. I don't want any delay, 0 seconds. We'll do an ease in and out, and let's say 1 second. It might be a bit too long, but let's see. So press play. Click on this image down here. Actually, might be too slow. I mean, too fast. So let's change that. Let's do 2 seconds. Click on the image. I don't know. Maybe it's the ease in that's throwing things off. This is the fun part about designing. You just experiment to figure out exactly how things will look. Now it's too slow. Let's go for 1.5 seconds. There we go. That's probably a bit better. So let's start from the beginning. We have this wonderful parallax effect. The clouds go out quick. The mountains kind of come down. Click on this image. Whoop. Beautiful. Now at this point, we want, when someone clicks on the image again, the image will kind of drop down and then, fit into place where it was before. And then everything will be back to the way it was. So what we could do technically is just transition from this to this. We want to make sure that that text layer is also there. So back in design mode, we want to grab the meta, put it there. And then if someone clicks on this image at the top, drag it over to this first artboard over here. It'll be tap. Let's go for a snap and 0.4 seconds, which is what I believe we had for this one as well. Yes. So click and click again. Oh, yeah, you know what I did? I forgot to change the opacity of this. And I could probably just remove this, because then it'll just disappear. Let's see. That works too. fancy. And then what we want to do is when someone clicks on this down arrow, let's go into prototype mode. This will actually link back to this artboard. Make sure everything's linked together. It'll be a tap. I believe this one was an in and out, maybe, which is making me hungry. Let's see, what was this one? In and out, 0.4 seconds. Dushi says, I want XD to have a timeline. That could be a possibility. Again, the team is definitely looking into additional features for auto-animate to give more flexibility for some advanced users. So there might be things coming. And it will work on the web at some point. Right now, if you export, if you try to embed a prototype on Behance or any other website, the auto-animate features will not work on the web, but that's in the works. All right, so if you click on this images icon at the bottom, and click on this one, there we go. Now what I may want to do is actually on this artboard here, just to get a little bit fancy, grab the hills and just move this up a little bit. Just to get a little bit fancy. Probably not necessary. But, you know, there we go. So that's great. Everything's looking pretty good. But one thing that I kind of want to touch on before we wrap things up, I could save it, but I'm not going to right now. If I go back to Dribble, a lot of people were also asking questions about this number counter. So maybe we can incorporate some sort of a number counter in this design as well. That could be fun. So let's do that. Let's hop over to XD again. And we may want to, where are we going to put the number counter? Where should we put the number counter? Maybe down here, in this corner here, for the likes maybe? Or we can put it up here. Who knows? We'll put it somewhere. We'll just make it first and then we'll figure out where to put it. So we're going to basically create a list of numbers, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 0. And I'm actually going to do this outside of the artboard, so it's a little bit easier to read. And because it depends on how many rows of numbers you want. In this case, we'll do 3 rows. So we're going to copy this, paste it, make sure we have 3 sets of numbers. And then we're going to duplicate and duplicate so they all line up correctly. Now at this point, we obviously don't want everything being shown. So I'm going to grab my rectangle tool and simply drag out a rectangle across the top row of icons or numbers. And turn down the opacity just a little bit so I can see that, make sure they're all lined up. And it looks like it is. And now with the rectangle selected, I'm also going to select all the number layers underneath it. So I'm going to hold down my Shift key, select all of those, go up to Object, and Mask with Shape. So now we can only see the top row numbers that were over top of the rectangle. And if I double click, I can go into the mask and I can see everything, right? I can move these around. And when I click off of it, I now can only see those numbers. So how do we actually use this thing? So I'm going to copy it. Let me delete it. Let's move it. Where should we put it? Maybe on this artboard. Make it a little bit larger. I don't know what it's going to say. Maybe it'll just say, or should we, where should we, someone give me an idea of where should we put this? Because it doesn't make sense anywhere here. But we're going to put it right here because we can. And this will be the last state. So I'm going to basically, let's go for 300. And in the first column, you want to use the first set of numbers. And the second column, you want to use the second set of numbers. So let's say 320. Top left corner of navigation. 320, and then here you want to use the last set of numbers. So I'm going to scroll all the way to the end. Places discovered. Interesting. Okay, I like that. Let's say 326. Aaron says 7. Okay, 327. There we go. 327. Now, where do I have that? So I'm going to put this in moving elements right here. Actually, I want to make sure it's behind the clouds, but above the hills. There we go. And on this artboard, I'm going to paste it. Same thing, above the clouds, below the clouds, but above the hills. And now this one is just a bunch of ones. This one goes to 327. Now, if I play this back, let's see what happens. Woo! Numbers. Cool. Now we're going to just add one more text layer below that. What did places discovered? I like that. Places discovered. Make this nice and small. It's a little bit too small, a little bigger. That looks okay. Decrease the opacity a little bit. Just a touch. All right, and I also want to make sure that this is placed properly on, on both artboards. Place is discovered right there. Let's see how this looks. Nice. It even moves with it. And I'm noticing just a few, like some of the numbers at the bottom. Oh no, it looks okay. Never mind. Fancy. And again, all I had to do was design how it looks at the beginning, how it looks at the end, and everything kind of just, Adobe XD just figured things out. And again, this probably isn't the most ideal placement for something like this. What I could do is I can actually replace the world is waiting, but then we'd probably miss out on some of the moving numbers in the background. But you get the idea. And I want to make sure that these layers are also on this artboard here. Will you provide a link for us to download this project? This one I cannot because I don't own all the rights to these images. But if you go and download the auto-animate UI kit, which is on Behance, and also they just put it on Dribbble this morning, there's a very similar project in there that I can't, with images that I could distribute. It's not as in-depth as this, but hopefully you can use that to create something of your own. I fought so hard to be able to distribute this almost exact project, but couldn't get the rights to all these images. So make sure to put this one right here. There we go. So let's see how this thing is looking from the beginning. All right, so we got the parallax effect, the clouds coming out, text in the background coming up, little number counter, places discovered. We have the images icon at the bottom, which we can click on. It morphs into that down arrow, which I should probably decrease the opacity a little bit on that one. And then you can click on this image, text comes down, click on it again, and you're basically back to this point. Now, Colby is asking, how would you share this with a developer? So it depends on the project. It also depends on your developers. So you could, the share icon at the top here, you can publish design specs, and that'll basically allow your developers to have access to character styles, colors, and then any approved assets. So if I wanted my developers to have access to my clouds, for example, what I can do is click on this icon here, and it'll mark it for batch export. I can also click on this as well. So any of these icons, any of these elements that are marked for batch export, will be available to my developers when I publish this prototype as a design spec. Now, it won't animate for them, so you have to work with developers who know how to animate or know how to implement some of this stuff. So you really have to, choose your developers wisely. But there are, there are plugins currently under the plugins section that will help you export code. Which one? Yotaku, I think. Yotako. I don't know how to pronounce that. This one, for example, does help you, export to Swift, Android, HTML, CSS. Of course, you will probably still have to have some sort of development skills, because any of these plugins, they'll probably never export things properly exactly the way you want them. So it'll give you a good start, but it probably won't be perfect. But yeah, definitely work with developers who know what they're doing, and that should help quite a bit. But we're also, the team internally is working on additional features and ideas on how to better export things, especially in the world of auto-animate and animation, as they're thinking about new and exciting ways to animate in XD and then exporting to developers. They're thinking of these things. They're also talking with a lot of designers and studios who do this on a daily basis. So before we wrap things up, let's take a look at this one more time. Press play. We have this cool little number counter. Images icon at the bottom transforms into a down arrow. We have this image and the text slides from the top. Bam. Fun stuff. And yeah, that's my Twitter link if you want to follow me there. I'm posting about XD all the time. Also sharing some cool tips and tricks. Also follow Elaine. I think someone posted her link as well. She shares some really cool pro tips as well. And going back over here, make sure to head over to Dribbble. There's a big bar at the top that says enter the Adobe XD playoff. And just, use some of the tips that I showed you and enter the contest. And you can win a MacBook Pro and a 1-year subscription to the Creative Cloud. Who doesn't want that? I wish I can enter this contest, but I did make this little image, this animation, which is really fun to put together. And it kind of showed a lot of the things that I showed today. And also, a few little things here and there on what's possible in Adobe XD. And we've seen some incredible stuff from designers and developers that they've done with XD, even people who haven't animated at all in the past. Good stuff. And then download the UI kit. And there's a video at the bottom. So that will probably do it for me for today. I hope you all enjoyed this. This was fun to put together. And definitely tweet at me. Follow Adobe XD on Twitter and Dribbble. Where else are we? Facebook. There might be an Instagram soon. Who knows? I don't know if I just spoiled something. And definitely enter the Dribbble contest and let us know. Show us your stuff. I would love to see it. And stay tuned tomorrow at where's the So thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you all next time. Take care.